30 more US tech firms have signed a brief effectively opposing that particular ban, bringing the total number of companies involved to 127. The new signatories include Tesla, Adobe, HP and Evernote. They join 97 others who filed a legal brief arguing that this ban inflicts significant harm on their businesses and, in their view, is unconstitutional. These amicus curiae briefs, or friends of the court briefs as it were, allow parties not directly involved in the case but who feel affected by it to provide their views to the court. Now, there's currently a nationwide temporary restraining order in place, effectively meaning that visa holders from Iraq, Syria, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan and Yemen will be allowed to enter the US until the full case has been heard. However, the president has said he will fight the order. In his opinion, it puts national security at risk. Let's get the latest developments on this. Daniel Rangers joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Daniel, this is a fairly complex case. Walk us through the range of outcomes here that may come out of the Court of Appeal in San Francisco.
Well, in order to firstly simplify this, what we are talking about here is not the case itself, but the restraining order that's not a restraining order for a person, but a restraining order for the executive order itself, for the travel ban. So that restraining order is being decided upon today. The possibilities are fairly endless as to what the court will end up doing. But at its most basic, the court could decide that this restraining order is legal and justified based on the merits of the case. If it looks like they've got a strong case, then they'll say, yeah, this restraining order should stay in place because it's likely that those opposed to this travel ban will win in the end, and therefore we keep it up there. But they could decide that actually the restraining order is not legally justified and that the president does indeed have broad discretionary powers over national security. In either case, it could go back, probably will go back to the court in Seattle that has imposed the restraining order, or it could also go to the Supreme Court. But there's a complication with the Supreme Court at the moment in that one of the 9 justices is out. In other words, President Trump has nominated one justice who's on the conservative side. The rest of the justices are split 4-4 between liberals and conservatives. So the Supreme Court option is also somewhat negligible, but it's likely this will go back to the court in Seattle to hear the entire case. But it depends now. What they're deciding on is whether this restraining order stays in place whilst the case goes through.
Indeed. So in part, today's ruling is also quite a bit about jurisdiction, isn't it? So, but let's step back a little bit here. What about the wider fight over the legality of this order? When is that likely to be resolved and how?
Jurisdiction, Rama, is at the center of this case. The US Constitution is at the center of this case. The power of the presidency itself is at the center of this case. So what they are effectively arguing is, how much power does Donald Trump have to influence the immigration system in this country? Can he override elements of the Constitution? Can he override a 1965 immigration law that specifies that there should be no discrimination in immigration cases? This is at the heart of it. And Donald Trump has argued consistently that he as president has broad discretionary powers over national security that override some of those other aspects of the Constitution and of the law.
Indeed. One last question for you. The US president has been extraordinarily vicious in his attacks on judges. In fact, he tweeted describing Judge James Robart, who suspended the ban last week, as a so-called judge. I mean, clearly there's no moderating influence in the White House against this kind of counterproductive behavior, is there?
Well, I think that the sort of Twitter attacks are likely to continue, and I'll tell you why. Donald Trump sees this as a direct line to his people, to the public. He's isolated there in the White House. He feels as if the press is filtering his every word, misinterpreting his every word. And when he has a line to the people through Twitter, This enables him to override the sort of checks and balances of the journalistic system. It enables him to override, in some cases, facts themselves. We've had several instances where there's been unfactual information given on Twitter and other medium to the public. So I don't expect that to go away. But what I do think will happen is that Steve Bannon and some of his colleagues on the alt-right side of this a new Trump administration have put forward this immigration policy in a very bungled way. Some of the departments didn't know exactly how to roll this out. It was a surprise to some of them. I don't think Donald Trump was happy with that. He has now given his Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, much more power to professionalize the rollout of any subsequent orders from him and any other subsequent policies. So I think we'll see some professionalization of the way that the government is run, but I think we'll continue to see some very, very strong rhetoric coming out of Donald Trump because he thinks that gives him a direct line to the public.
Indeed. Chaos and incompetence at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thanks for the update, Daniel. That's Daniel Ranges live, of course, in Washington, D.C.